Not far from where I'm standing are some of the world's most notorious killers: smallpox, Ebola, anthrax. Behind these closed doors, scientists are working to unlock their deadly secrets. This is the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, better known as the CDC. Their mission is to promote health by preventing and controlling disease. They were there when the specter of polio, which once paralyzed thousands every year, became a thing of the past. When a mysterious disease broke out in the Southwest, it was the CDC that uncovered the dangerous hantavirus. And every year, when influenza jeopardizes lives, they are there. In today's post-9/11 world, they were there when anthrax was used as a weapon. And now, with the threat of smallpox back to haunt us, the CDC is there again. The CDC headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia, has all the ambiance of a college campus, but with the security of a top-secret military installation. I came to visit the CDC to meet the people whose mission it is to protect our health. And for the first time, I'll be able to take you inside labs where only a handful of scientists are allowed. The CDC operates under the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Today, 8,500 people work for the CDC worldwide, 1,600 of them at the Atlanta headquarters. It has been around since 1946, when the first mission was to battle malaria. Now its mission includes homeland security, and the precautions taken here reflect a new sensibility.
This job has changed, probably started really changing in 1996 when the Olympics came to Atlanta, and we've tightened up quite a bit since 9/11.
Because dangerous viruses are kept here, the CDC could be a target. So the perimeter is now protected by concrete barriers and armed security officers.
Well, the CDC campus, we have several, but the headquarters facility here in Atlanta is one of the more secure facilities in Atlanta, if not the nation.
We agreed to certain ground rules to enter. All of our equipment would be searched, certain areas were off limits, and we would be escorted every step of the way. Electronically coded badges strictly control access. No employee can simply roam the halls. And even when allowed in, you're constantly watched. Cameras are everywhere. The security center is staffed 24/7.
Well, basically what you're seeing here is a surveillance, mostly the surveillance bank on cameras that we have strategically placed throughout the campus. Our security folks rotate on a regular schedule, and we keep our people with the eyes on the cameras fresh.
1631 control.
The tight security does not allow any maps of the CDC campus. People who've worked here for years don't know where everything is. And the directories common to any office building don't even have room numbers.
And there are other things in place which I'm not at liberty to address right now.
The woman in charge of the CDC is Dr. Julie Gerberding. She's the CDC's 14th director, but the first woman appointed to the job. She has an impressive list of credentials, but for her, first and foremost is being an MD.
So I just have to ask you, I read that you grew up in South Dakota, I think about 100 miles from the nearest medical facility.
It was a very small town.
And here you are, you head up, this oversees all of medicine in the whole country. Did you ever dream that would happen?
I dreamed of being a physician, but I certainly didn't know it was going to take me here. It's an honor.
During a time when the CDC is more vital than ever, Dr. Gerberding took a moment to help us better understand the responsibilities of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. What does it take to be able to approach this job as director of the CDC today in today's world?
We really have a window of opportunity here because prior to the anthrax events in the fall, most people were not familiar with CDC. And suddenly it became very relevant to their personal security and safety.
Well, when you come to work, it's not a big margin for error when you are working with deadly viruses. And if something goes wrong, a life could be lost. What's it like to have that kind of responsibility?
I take it very seriously. But in terms of worker safety, I've just made it my own personal goal to ensure that CDC is the safest and healthiest workplace that we can make.
With new focus on homeland security, the threat of what they call a BT event, a bioterror attack, is never far from their minds. So Dr. Gerberdine's office includes an essential piece of equipment, a secure telephone.
This is the secure phone. So if we need to talk with someone about a confidential issue and we want to make sure that it can't be intercepted, we use this phone. It scrambles the message.
The White House, anywhere like that would have to be on that phone?
Exactly. If it was something that we really didn't want to hear about on the news, we would make sure that we were using this phone.
Do you have a secure phone in your home?
Yes, I do.
When you get a call in the middle of the night, what goes through your mind?
When my phone rings in the middle of the night, my heart rate goes up, no question.
Do you think it's just inevitable that we're going to have some kind of an attack?
I think we'd be very foolish not to be prepared.
If a call comes in reporting an outbreak, whether natural or man-made, the CDC sends investigators called epidemic intelligence officers, better known as disease detectives.
They're the ones that have to go in.
They're there at the front line to really assist tracking down those things. Often they interview the patients or they inspect the sites where the disease might be emanating.
In 1993, an outbreak of an unexplained pulmonary illness in the southwestern United States put the CDC on the front page.
They finally had to put me on a ventilator because I couldn't breathe anymore. My lungs were totally full of fluid. I was drowning.
When 5 people died, no one knew that the carrier was the benign-looking deer mouse. It took the efforts of disease detectives working with local agencies for the CDC to be able to track down the mystery disease they call hantavirus. Scott Harper was a disease detective with the CDC for 2 years.
What are the tools of your trade when you're out there?
Most of the time it's our feet. We go around and we interview people and we write down a lot of information. We always have a notebook computer to do some sort of data analysis, basically doing a lot of walking and talking.
Disease knows no borders, so being the first line of defense sends the disease detectives all over the world.
What's the toughest case you've ever worked on?
During my time at CDC, the Ebola outbreak, for multiple reasons, was the toughest.
On 24 hours' notice, Scott Harper was sent to Uganda, where an outbreak of Ebola flared up. There he witnessed how Ebola can ravage its victims. There is no cure, no vaccine, and little hope.
It involved a lot of kids, more children than were seen in prior outbreaks of Ebola. And frequently, for obvious reasons, these kids would just be dropped off at the ward because the family was quite worried.
Spread by direct contact, Ebola is one of the deadliest viruses known. It causes fever and uncontrollable bleeding. It's as if the victim's internal organs are melting away.
We didn't speak the language. We weren't able to take care of them, and of course couldn't really even touch them.
Nearly 9 out of 10 infected will die. Unknown and sometimes deadly pathogens are gathered in the field and brought back to labs here at the CDC headquarters. That's where I was headed next, where no other journalist had been before, inside the biosafety labs with the doctor who worked on the mystery of the anthrax attacks.
Actually very unusual for us to let anyone into that area of the campus, and we keep a very close hold on how people access those regions of the facility. In fact, I do not have access to the level 3 laboratories.
Behind Closed Doors continues here on A&E. In the fall of 2001, shock and concern swept the country.
I'm scared. No one in America probably ever dreamed, we'd be fighting anthrax.
Anthrax had been sent through the mail. We all saw the headlines. Here's what you didn't see. The response mobilized thousands of people from Florida to Washington, D.C. But inside labs at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the investigation relied on just a handful of scientists. Here, they held the keys to the safety of the population.
It does look like we have a case of anthrax here. Everybody agree?
Yeah.
Looks good. Looks good.
Working like detectives in a laboratory, the small staff confronted the mystery. They were led by the CDC's own expert on anthrax, Dr. Tanya Popovich. She is respected around the world as an authority on the killer they know as Bacillus anthracis.
You have brand new labs here, state of the art, right?
Yes, we do. We moved in about a year ago.
About a week before anthrax
About a
broke.
week, a couple of days before the first samples during the anthrax investigation came to the CDC.
To experience firsthand how they identified anthrax, Dr. Popovich would guide me on a journey into a BSL-3 lab. That's short for Biosafety Level 3. Only there could we face the deadly bacteria.
Well, the first time that we actually knew something might be happening was on October 3rd, Wednesday evening.
The first known victim fell ill in Florida. An alert physician made the diagnosis, and a CDC-trained clinician made the preliminary identification. It was up to Dr. Popovich to confirm that the pathogen was anthrax.
Well, I think in the beginning, a lot of us, and including myself, we almost refused to believe that this could have been intentional, because it's hard to imagine that somebody would want to do this, to a fellow human being.
How many people have access to BioLevel 3?
In terms of working with anthrax, only 6 at the entire CDC.
Biosafety Level 1 and 2 labs work with non-lethal agents. The more dangerous pathogens are confined to BSL-3. To protect their security, we agreed not to reveal the exact location of the Level 3 labs. I can tell you that we had to pass through several car-keyed doors. The labs are carefully protected because contact with anthrax could be a death sentence.
People who acquire inhalational anthrax, unless treated, are going to die. Even when they're treated on time, not everybody is going to survive. We had 5 deaths. Out of 11 inhalational cases, 5 people died. So in spite of everything that can possibly be done for these people, sometimes it is a fatal disease.
At the CDC, I had to take the same carefully laid out precautions every lab technician must take. What for me is a journey into unfamiliar territory is another day at the office for Dr. Popovich.
And to you, this is just part of coming to work every day.
Yes, it is.
The first steps are to gown up in surgical scrubs. Every part of your body is covered.
And then tie this as a second. If you turn around just a little bit.
When Dr. Popovich suited up to see the first samples from the case in Florida, what they knew was that photo editor Robert Stevens was gravely ill. They suspected inhalation anthrax. What they didn't know was that more anthrax was in the mail system and had already infected at least 8 people in the New York City area.
What you want to do is, let me show you. What you want to do is get your head.
The air I breathe will be filtered through a battery-powered respirator hooked up to a hooded face shield.
Okay.
Lastly, we put on not 1, but 2 pairs of gloves.
And so we're going to put 2 layers of gloves.
Okay.
This is one of the characteristics of working in a biosafety level 3, that we will have 2 layers of gloves at all times.
Do you ever get scared? Do you ever worry about, you're going in there, I know you're taking every precaution.
I think you don't when you know what you're working with, when you know how to protect yourself. I always do the last checkup. I have my boots.
The lab we were about to enter had been decontaminated, and we would handle a vaccine form of anthrax. That is anthrax that has been modified so it does not make people ill. Still, once we were suited up, I could feel the seriousness of the work that goes on behind this closed door.
So now we're entering the actual biosafety level 3, what we call the procedure room. And if you would please sit over there.
The air in this lab is exchanged 12 to 24 times an hour, so particles can't linger. All the work is done inside a biosafety cabinet. It too is sealed off with an invisible column of air that flows across the opening. Once your hands enter the cabinet, they stay in.
They need to be in a way that your hands are beyond this airflow. This is like a shield of air that protects us from anything that is inside biosafety cabinet.
Oh, okay.
We have prepared an envelope here.
Dr. Popovich showed me an envelope with an unidentified powder. My job was to find out if it contained anthrax spores.
I'm going to show you how we would handle this.
In the safety of the bio cabinet, I prepared to take a sample of powder from the envelope. If this were the real thing, inhaling a minute amount could be fatal.
If there was no powder,
The anthrax powder they dealt with is best thought of as a gas. It basically dispersed the instant it came in contact with the air in a very deadly way.
all you need to do is just a little bit of powder.
That kind of shows you how dangerous it is too, right? That you only need a little tiny bit.
I sat just feet away from where Dr. Popovich tested the first samples from the patient in Florida.
Tell me what you felt when you started seeing those first ones come in, and you knew what it was.
I remember exactly, Dr. Rob Wyant and I were sitting in a lab next to each other because we always work in pairs. All of a sudden, he said, "That's our boy." And I looked at him and I didn't know whether I'm going to cry or say it couldn't be. And it was an awful feeling thinking that this looks more and more like this could be intentional.
The day after they first tested for anthrax, Robert Stevens died. Letters laced with anthrax were already in New York, and just days later, more were mailed to the capital. At the CDC, samples arrived by the hundreds.
You do have to do everything slow. Okay?
Everything needs to be, there is no rush.
In the lab, the sample I'd put in a solution went onto a slide.
Slowly, no splashes, no rush. Okay.
At the microscope, I got my first up-close look at what could be anthrax.
What you're going to see is bright oval-shaped forms, very small. What you want to do is...
Oh, I see them already.
Okay, good.
Are those spores?
Those are the spores.
The lethal spores are so small, millions could fit on the head of a pin.
Very highly concentrated material.
But a tiny bit of that kind of powder
Contains
really,
millions.
Oh, really?
And if these were indeed anthrax spores, at this concentration, this would be enough to infect a large number of people if they're not protected.
My next step in the lab was to confirm that the spores I saw under the microscope were indeed anthrax.
We would like to see if these spores will actually grow and look like anthrax. So what I'm going to
Using a tool called a loop, I drew lines of a solution containing spores onto a blood culture. This petri dish would go into an incubator.
already after 12 hours, they will start to grow and we can do the testing if it's an emergency.
And this is what it would look like when it comes out, a growing colony of bacteria. We compared it to a growth of a known anthrax sample.
This is what Bacillus anthracis looks like.
The specimen I held, grown from the envelope sample, looked just like the anthrax culture Dr. Popovich held.
This looks very suspicious to be Bacillus anthracis.
But it would take a final procedure called a gamma-phage test to confirm it. We placed drops of a special solution on the culture.
There we go. Excellent.
If the colony does not appear where the drops were put, the test is positive. After given time to grow, the plates can be checked.
So let's see what you and I worked on. Is it really anthrax or not? So make the diagnosis.
Oh, it definitely is.
Yes, yes.
It is definitely anthrax.
Definitely.
You can tell right
Yes.
there.
The hole in the growth proved that the sample was anthrax.
That's
Yes.
So that's
that,
anthrax.
That is a positive test.
Wow.
Ear area.
To make sure we don't carry out anything dangerous, there is a strict procedure for leaving the lab. We swabbed samples off each other's garments.
That's good. I'll call you for these results.
Equipment used inside the Level 3 lab goes out through an autoclave. Each piece is steam cleaned and pressure cooked for 1 hour at 121 degrees centigrade. This ensures the eradication of any lingering virus.
The simple thing is
Getting the results out of the lab is a bit of a trick. All handwritten notes will stay inside. Dr. Popovich faxes a copy to a machine in the office right next door.
come over here, and we're gonna.
Once outside the lab, the gloves, gowns, and booties will be destroyed. The respirators are bagged, cleaned, and disinfected.
Okay.
During my visit, I spent 4 hours inside the Biosafety Level 3 lab. At the time of the anthrax attacks, Dr. Popovich virtually lived here.
During the investigation, you can imagine we sometimes went into the lab 3 or 4 times a day.
In all, the anthrax attacks murdered 5 people. But there's no telling how many would become victims if one ghost of epidemics past comes back to haunt us today: smallpox. Behind Closed Doors continues here on A&E. The job of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is to watch out for the nation's health. But who watches out for their health? The CDC has their own clinic. Here they prepare workers to face everything from rabies to rubella.
We have maybe 100 to 200 people a month departing the CDC for international travel. We're also responsible for any on-site exposures. If someone is entering an anthrax-tainted building, we're going to be preparing them to do that work safely.
The clinic is thoroughly stocked with a long list of vaccines. That list includes vaccine for a disease that in the last 100 years has taken more lives than all the wars and epidemics put together: smallpox.
And at one time, it was considered eradicated from the earth.
Well, the disease has been eradicated, but the virus has not. And it is somewhat ironic that we have a much more active research program now involving smallpox virus than we do research programs for most other agents that we deal with. It's a sign of the times.
This is what a case of smallpox looks like: the body covered with hard bumps called pustules. This man survived the last naturally occurring case of smallpox in 1977. The immunity from inoculations received before 1972, when American doctors last routinely gave them, has probably worn off. Vaccine given in the first 2 or 3 days after exposure can still stop someone from becoming sick.
If we had a smallpox outbreak, if there was a bioterrorist attack, do we have enough vaccine to inoculate everyone?
Today, we have enough smallpox vaccine to protect every single person in the United States if we had to in an emergency.
I assume then you have a smallpox vaccination?
You know, I'm not in the category of people for whom that vaccine is indicated right now.
So even working in this building then?
I'm not at risk.
It is no secret that the CDC has samples of smallpox stored here. What is secret is exactly where the dangerous virus is hidden.
And what can you tell us about where the world's deadliest viruses are kept?
You know, I really can't discuss the security of the deadly viruses other than to say it's gold standard.
Smallpox is so deadly, it can only be handled in a lab that meets the highest standards for confinement.
Behind me is the Biosafety Level 4 lab, the most secure and potentially dangerous place at the CDC. Only a handful of scientists ever go behind this closed door.
The scientists who enter the BSL-4 labs take extreme precautions. They go in only through a changing room where all of their street clothes are left behind. They seal themselves into a spacesuit and plug into a filtered air supply. Once inside the lab, this suit will be the only barrier between them and dangerous infectious agents. Jim Hughes is in charge of the Biosafety Level 4 labs here at the CDC. We spoke across from BSL-4 labs, where we could see workers from the Department of Defense in their distinct orange spacesuits handling smallpox.
This is where the smallpox work goes on this side.
The exact nature of their activities is secret, but they could be working on a cure or a safer vaccine.
Has there been a greater sense of nervousness since 9/11 and the Anthrax attacks?
Well, we are on high alert and constantly vigilant. I wouldn't say that we're nervous, but I can tell you that we're on high alert.
To anybody looking from the outside, it just seems so dangerous.
Well, this is a very interesting breed of people that go into work that involves hemorrhagic fevers. And they have to be worked with both in the field and in the laboratory setting very carefully. So it takes a special type of person with very specialized training to do this kind of work. It's certainly not for everyone.
Workers must always be aware of the danger of puncturing the suit. The tiniest hole could allow a fatal infection. The noise of air rushing into the hood is constant. Communication inside the lab is difficult at best.
What?
They work typically in pairs, so we like to have at least 2 people in there at any one time in case there's some sort of problem where a second person can help.
And how long do you stay at one time?
Well, people tell me they can last 3 to 4 hours reasonably comfortably. They've learned not to drink that second cup of coffee in the morning before they go in.
When leaving the lab, workers must take a decontaminating shower before moving into the changing area. A thorough drenching with Lysol is a must.
Emergency Response, Karen Cleveland speaking.
The CDC's Emergency Operations Center is staffed around the clock to answer any health crisis. They can respond whether the emergency is a simple outbreak of food poisoning or a more diabolical BT event.
We had been planning within the CDC for these agents and for radiation and chemical problems long before September 11th. But on 9/11, we all realized that there are very bad people out there capable of doing horrific things, and so we needed to ramp up our efforts, and we indeed have done that.
And in the wake of 9/11, the nation's pharmaceutical stockpile has been beefed up. They're called push packs. Each one is made up of 50 tons of supplies. In the event of a natural disaster or terrorist attack, a push pack can be on the scene within 12 hours.
The fact that it's in a push package to us
means that it goes out the door without anyone thinking about what's in it. We don't have to pull product from shelves. It's simply pre-containerized and sent out on either trucks or airplanes.
Each pack includes things like antibiotics, needles and IVs, a tablet counting machine, and nerve agent antidotes. Recently, the number of push packs has been increased from 8 to 12. Where are they? To protect them, their locations are kept secret.
The best way to answer it is we've thought a great deal about where they're located. We place them in locations that can allow them to get anywhere in the United States, including Hawaii, including Alaska, in 12 hours or less.
And if there was a bioterrorist attack, are we ready? Is the CDC ready?
You know, people always want a yes or no answer to that question. And the truth is, preparedness is a process. We're certainly more prepared than we were a year ago, but we're not done yet. And we are continuing the process of taking steps every single day to ensure the best possible protection we can provide.
If a biological terror attack happened, the CDC would mobilize in an instant. Yet today they are already fighting yet another threat to Americans, one that may not be as frightening, but just as insidious.
What's our biggest health risk today?
In this country, the #1 health risk is obesity.
So everybody can be fearful of a terrorist attack, but the biggest enemy is obesity.
Cardiovascular disease, diabetes, stroke, those are the problems of today that are going to affect the lives of most Americans if we don't improve.
While they prepare for the worst, the CDC seems to bring out the best. During my visit to their headquarters, everyone I met at the CDC had two things in common: a sense of pride in their profession and a basic need to help.
One of the incredible things about CDC is that we absolutely have the world's most motivated workforce, and it didn't take terrorism to create that. People work here because they are truly committed to humanitarian values and just a profound sense of altruism.
Behind closed doors of the CDC.